Some photographs lie. They smile from a wooden frame. They promise a happiness that never existed. A perfect family. A father, a mother, 4 children, a house in Quintana. Sunday, palm trees, paradise. But if you look closely at the photo of the Vázquez family, if you focus on the girl's eyes, you will see the truth. It is not paradise. It's the prologue to a nightmare so deep that reality itself breaks apart. I'm Mateo Del Valle, and this is Forbidden Reality. The story I'm going to tell you today is not a legend. It's not a horror story to scare children. It's the chronicle of a monster dressed as a father, and of a system designed not to see, to not hear, to not act. Before we dive into this darkness, I ask you to subscribe, to turn on notifications, not for an algorithm, but so that these voices, drowned out by indifference, can be heard, so that oblivion does not win its final battle. Let's begin. It all starts with silence, a silence that lasted almost 15 years. Carmen Mendoza had not spoken to her sister Ophelia in all that time, not because of a fight, not because of resentment, but because Ophelia, her husband Domingo, and their 4 children had simply vanished. One day the phone line was cut. The letters stopped coming. The house they had in Felipe Carrillo Puerto was sold. No one knew where they had gone. The family shrugged. "That's Domingo," they said. "Always so strange, so intense. I'm sure they went to find God somewhere else." Carmen never believed that story. She knew Domingo. She knew the strange light in his eyes when he talked about purity, about sin, about the corrupt world that lurked outside. She knew the fear in her sister's eyes, a fear that Ophelia always tried to hide with a forced smile. For years, Carmen tried to find them, but it was like looking for a drop of water in the middle of the ocean. Quintana is vast. The jungle is a green monster that devours secrets. And people sometimes prefer not to remember. Life went on. The pain of absence became a silent scar. Until one morning in March. A damp, gray morning. The mailman handed her a yellowed envelope. No return address, just her name and address written in shaky handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper, torn from a child's notebook. The words were few, confusing. "He's always watching us. The garden needs water. The old flowers are wilting. Don't let the moon go out." And at the end, a signature. Ophelia. Carmen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It wasn't a letter. It was a coded cry for help. A message in a bottle thrown from hell. The garden. That's what Domingo called the world he wanted to build. His personal Eden. The flowers. That's what he called his daughters. Moon, Sunday, Star. And there was a 4th child. A boy. Mateo. The only one who wasn't a flower. He was the weed. Carmen made a decision. She quit her job. She packed a small suitcase. She bought a one-way bus ticket to Chetumal. She was going to find her sister, or die trying. She didn't know she was about to open a door that no one wanted to walk through. The door to a horror that defies understanding. A family secret rotting under the Caribbean sun. The trip was long. Hours on the road watching the same green landscape go by. Over and over again. The jungle seemed to be watching her, judging her. In Chetumal, she began her search. She went to government offices, archives, records. No one knew anything about the Vázquez family. It was as if the earth had swallowed them up. She showed people the old family photo. "Have you seen them?" People shook their heads, some with indifference, others with a shadow of fear in their eyes. As if the name Domingo Vázquez awakened an uncomfortable memory, a memory they preferred to keep buried. Carmen felt the first pang of despair. The world was vast and cold, and she was alone. Her hands trembled as she held the letter. Ophelia's words danced before her eyes. Don't let the moon go out. Moon, her niece, the eldest. There had to be a clue. Something. She remembered the old stories. Domingo always talked about living far from the poison of the city, about returning to the land, about creating a pure community. She began asking around in the markets of small towns, on the outskirts, where civilization fades and the jungle reclaims its territory. He talked to farmers, to loggers, to hunters. For weeks, he found only silence, walls of mistrust. Until an old man, a herb seller in a market in Bacalar, recognized the photo. Not the whole family, just him, Domingo. The prophet, he called him. The old man spat on the ground. That man is crazy, he said in a low voice. Or he's the devil. He lives inside, where no one goes. He gave her vague directions. Follow the dirt road that leaves the highway 3 leagues from here. When you see a dead ceibo tree with branches like claws, follow the path that opens up on the left. But don't go, ma'am. There are places where God no longer looks. Carmen thanked him. Her heart was beating wildly, fear and hope, a toxic mixture. She rented an old Jeep. She bought water and some food, and she drove into the green heart of darkness. The dirt road was a red scar in the jungle. The Jeep shook violently. The air was thick, humid. The sound of insects was a constant, hypnotic buzzing. She found the dead ceibo tree. Its twisted branches rose toward the sky like the fingers of a skeleton. A bad omen. Carmen was tempted to turn back, to return to the safety of her normal life. But the image of her sister, the shaky handwriting, pushed her forward. She left the Jeep and followed the path on foot. The jungle embraced her. Sunlight barely filtered through the leaves. The silence was almost total, broken only by the crunch of her own footsteps and the song of strange birds. She walked for almost an hour. Sweat soaked her clothes. Fear was a metallic taste in her mouth. And then she saw it. A clearing in the middle of nowhere. A makeshift wooden fence. And inside, a cabin, large, made of logs with a palm roof. Smoke rose from a chimney. There was a vegetable garden, farm animals. It looked like a picture of a simple life, self-sufficient. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The air was thick with oppressive tension. There was no laughter, no sounds of children playing. Only an unnatural silence. He hid behind some bushes. He watched. The door of the cabin opened. A woman came out. It was Ophelia. But it wasn't her. It was an empty version of her. A shell. Her skin was tanned by the sun, her hands rough. But it was her gaze that made her blood run cold. Dull. Dead. She moved like an automaton, gathering clothes from a clothesline. Behind her, 3 more figures emerged. Young. They wore simple, long clothes, like from another era. Their hair was long and braided. Carmen held her breath. It was them. Luna, Sul, Estrella. They had grown up. They were almost women. But they moved with the same sleepwalking slowness as their mother. Their faces were expressionless, like porcelain dolls forgotten in an attic. And then he appeared. Domingo. Time had been hard on him. His hair was a gray tangle, his beard long and unkempt. But his eyes, His eyes still had the same fanatical fire, the same terrifying intensity. He went out onto the porch and sat down in a rocking chair. The three young women approached him, not like daughters greeting their father. They knelt at his feet. One took off his boots, another massaged his shoulders. The third simply stared at him with sickening adoration. Domingo didn't speak to them. He just nodded, his gaze lost on the horizon. The king in his castle of madness. Carmen felt like she was going to vomit. This wasn't a family. It was a cult, an open-air prison. Her heart was pounding against her ribs. She had to get them out of there. She had to. But how? She was alone, in the middle of nowhere, facing a man who had managed to wipe her family off the map. She waited for nightfall. The jungle became a place of shadows and menacing sounds. Every crack, every whisper of the wind sounded like the footsteps of a beast. She crept up to the cabin. A small window was ajar. From there she could see inside. A large room, a long table. Domingo was sitting at the head of the table, eating in silence. Ophelia and the three girls were standing beside him, waiting. They weren't eating. They were just staring at him. When he finished, he stood up. He gestured, and the girls began to eat the leftovers, with their hands, quickly, like hungry animals. Ophelia didn't eat anything. She just stood there, staring at the wall, an empty wall. Carmen backed away, stifling a sob. The horror was deeper than she had imagined. It wasn't just control, it was dehumanization. She saw one of the girls, the oldest, Luna, go out to the backyard. She was going to fetch water from a well. This was her chance. Carmen ran, crouching, to the well. "Luna," she whispered. The young girl jumped. Her eyes, large and frightened, met Carmen's. For a second, Carmen saw a flash of recognition, an echo of the girl she once was. "It's me, Luna, your Aunt Carmen." The girl shook her head. The fear on her face was absolute. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My master will be angry." "Your master?" asked Carmen, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Do you mean your father?" Luna nodded. "He is our husband," said the young woman, with a naturalness that broke Carmen's heart. "We are his sacred wives, the mothers of the new humanity." Carmen felt the ground opening up beneath her feet. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, but the picture they formed was monstrous. "And your mother?" asked Carmen, her voice breaking. "She is the handmaid. She serves us. It's her penance for her sins in the previous world." The air became unbreathable. Every word Luna spoke was a blow, a hammer blow to the skull. Domingo hadn't just kidnapped them. He hadn't just isolated them. He had broken them. He had reprogrammed them. He had erased the idea of father, daughter, mother, and he had replaced it with a deranged and perverse theology. "And your brother? Mateo?" Carmen dared to ask. Luna's face contorted in pain. "The weed was pulled out of the garden a long time ago," she recited, as if reading from a sacred text. "His impurity could not taint our Eden. Gone. Him too. Luna, listen to me. This isn't real. He's lied to you, to all of you. You are his daughters. His daughters," Carmen pleaded. But Luna's eyes went blank again. The indoctrination was too strong, too deep. "You have to go," she repeated. "If he finds you, he'll hurt you." She grabbed the bucket of water and ran back to the cabin, leaving Carmen alone in the dark, shaking, broken. The taste of rust in her mouth was unbearable. The cold of the night was nothing compared to the cold she felt in her soul. She crawled back into the jungle. She didn't sleep. She curled up in a ball, listening to the sounds of the night and the beating of her own terrified heart. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't face Domingo alone. She needed help. She needed the police, the law, the outside world. At dawn, she set off on her way back. Every step was an effort. The image of her nieces, of her sister, was burned into her mind. She was going to save them, no matter what the cost. It didn't matter what she was up against. She didn't know that the monster in the jungle was only the beginning. She was about to meet a much bigger monster, more indifferent, more cruel. The monster of bureaucracy. The story of Domingo Vázquez did not begin in the jungle. It began in a church, a small neighborhood church in a suburb of Mexico City. He wasn't the pastor. He was just another member of the congregation. But he had charisma, a powerful voice, and an interpretation of the Bible that was both terrifying and seductive. He spoke of the apocalypse, of the imminence of the end, of the need to separate oneself from the corrupt world. He began to gather a small group of followers, broken people, people looking for answers. Ophelia was one of them, a shy, insecure woman. In Domingo, she found a certainty she had never had before. They got married, they had children. But Domingo's small group never grew. His ideas were too extreme, too radical. He was expelled from the church, accused of heresy. That rejection broke him, or rather, it solidified him in his madness. If the world didn't want his salvation, he would create his own world, a world in his own image. He started at home. Control became absolute. He banned television, radio, friends. The girls stopped going to school. "I will be their only teacher," he said. He taught them his own version of history, of science, of religion, one in which he was the prophet chosen by God. Mateo, the only son, rebelled. He questioned. He was a free spirit. And in Domingo's world, freedom was the worst of sins. The punishments were brutal. Lockouts, beatings, forced fasting. Ophelia tried to protect him, but her will was already broken. She was a prisoner in her own home. When Mateo turned 14, he ran away. He simply disappeared one night. For Domingo, it was not a loss. It was a purification. "The weed has been pulled out," he announced to the family. Shortly after, he sold everything, and they moved to the jungle of Quintana, far away from everything, far away from everyone. There, in total isolation, he completed his masterpiece of horror. He declared that the outside world had been destroyed by divine judgment, that they were the only survivors, the new lineage of Adam. And he, like Adam, needed wives to repopulate the earth. Luna, the eldest, was only 13 when the first sacred wedding took place, a strange ceremony held under the moonlight. Ophelia was forced to participate in the ritual, handing over her own daughter to her husband. Then it was Sol's turn, and later Estrella's. Over time, he kept them under his control, treating them as if they were his exclusive property. And his real wife, Ophelia, he demoted to the role of servant, a constant reminder of her failure in the world before. 15 years. 15 years of this green hell. A parallel universe of abuse and madness. While the world kept turning, while people went to work, watched TV, complained about traffic, a few miles away, a family had ceased to exist, and 3 girls were being raised as wives by their own father. This was the secret Carmen Mendoza carried in her soul when she arrived, covered in mud and despair, at the nearest police station. A small concrete building in the town of Felipe Carrillo Puerto. She was about to discover that horror has many faces, and indifference is one of the cruelest. Carmen entered the police station. The air smelled of stale coffee and old paper. A ceiling fan spun lazily, stirring the hot air. A fat, sweaty officer sat behind a desk. He was watching a soap opera on a small television. He didn't even look up when Carmen approached. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to report a crime, a kidnapping. Child abuse." The officer sighed. A long, theatrical sigh, as if she were the biggest nuisance of his day. He turned down the volume on the television with the remote control. He looked at her for the first time. His eyes were clouded with boredom. "All right, ma'am. Tell me what happened," he said without any interest. Carmen told him everything. Her sister's disappearance, the letter, the search, the cabin in the jungle, what she saw, what Luna told her. "They're your wives. He's keeping them as slaves," she finished, with tears in her eyes. The officer listened without changing his expression. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked in protest. "Look, ma'am," he began in a condescending tone. "You're from the city, right? Things are different here." He paused. He yawned. A wide yawn without bothering to cover his mouth. "That man, Domingo, we know him. He's a strange guy, a religious fanatic, but he doesn't bother anyone. He lives his life out there in the mountains. He lives with his wife and daughters. Well, they're his family, aren't they? It's a family matter." Carmen couldn't believe what she was hearing. A family matter. "They're minors. He's hurting them. He's holding them captive," she exclaimed. "Lower your voice, ma'am. You're in a government office," replied the officer, looking annoyed. "Did you witness it? Did you see him do anything to them?" "No, but do you have any proof? Photographs? Any recordings?" He interrupted her. "I have my niece's testimony. She told me they're treated like his wives." The officer chuckled. "Ma'am, girls from the mountains sometimes say strange things. They're ignorant. And you tell me you haven't seen your sister in 15 years. Maybe things have changed. Maybe they like living that way." Carmen felt a wave of anger and nausea wash over her. The world went out of focus. The walls of the office seemed to close in on her. "You're not going to do anything, are you?" she whispered. "There's nothing we can do," said the officer, turning up the volume on the television again. "Unless you bring me a formal complaint, signed by the victims, or a warrant from a judge. Until then, it's just gossip. And I've got a lot of work to do." He pointed to a pile of papers on his desk. The soap opera filled the silence once again. Carmen stood there for a moment, paralyzed. The system wasn't broken. It was designed that way, to protect itself, to maintain the status quo, to ignore the cries coming from the jungle. She left the police station. The midday sun hit her like a punch. She sat down on the sidewalk. She cried. She cried with rage, with helplessness. The cold from the police station had seeped into her bones, a cold that would not go away easily. But she did not give up. If the local police would not help her, she would go higher. She traveled to Chetumal, the state capital. She looked for the state attorney general's office, a modern building, imposing, air-conditioned and with security guards. Here, she thought, they would listen to her. She waited 3 hours in a waiting room with orange plastic chairs. Finally, she was received by an official, a young woman in an impeccable suit with a tired look on her face. Carmen told her story again. This time, she was calmer. She presented the facts in an orderly manner. The official listened, typing notes on her computer. She nodded from time to time. "I understand," she said. "I see." When Carmen finished, the official looked at her over her glasses. "All right, Ms. Mendoza, this sounds very serious," she said, in a tone that did not indicate any seriousness. "But we have a procedural problem here." "Procedure?" Carmen repeated. "Yes. You are reporting several possible crimes: abuse, illegal deprivation of liberty, perhaps even human trafficking. But we have no victims to report. We have no bodies. We have no physical evidence." He turned his monitor around. He showed her a form on the screen. "What we can do for now," he continued, "is open a missing persons file. Specifically for your nieces and your sister, since you have no contact with them. But they're not missing." "I know where they are," Carmen exclaimed. "As far as the system is concerned, they are," said the official with irritating patience. "They cannot be located by their relatives. They are not registered in any recent census. Legally, their status is missing." Carmen felt like she was in a bad dream, a bureaucratic nightmare. When Carmen returned to the office with the evidence, a superior told her, staring blankly at a monitor, "Ms. Mendoza, this is now a missing persons case. That's another department's responsibility. Fill out Form 2B prime." The official pointed to a window at the end of the hallway. "Please go to that window. Ask for Form 2B. Fill one out for each missing family member. Attach copies of their birth certificates and a recent photo, if you have one. Once you turn it in, you will be assigned a file number and the investigation will begin." The system did not seek justice. It sought to organize the horror into folders, to classify it, file it away until it was forgotten. "And how long will the investigation take?" asked Carmen, feeling her last hope fade away. The official shrugged. "It depends on the workload. It could be months, years even. There are many cases, ma'am." She gave her a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Be patient." Carmen stood up. Her legs felt like lead. She walked down the cold, sterile hallway. The sound of her heels was the only thing breaking the silence. A silence filled with whispers from other cases, other tragedies, other files gathering dust on a shelf. She left the building. The air conditioning gave way to the stifling heat of the street. She felt dizzy, alone, completely alone. The monster wasn't just a Mingo. The monster was a faceless system, a maze of corridors and forms. A deaf and blind giant. She sat down on a bench in the park across the street. She looked at the imposing building of the prosecutor's office. It looked like a fortress, designed not to protect the weak, but to keep them out. For the first time, she understood her sister Ophelia's despair. The feeling of being trapped in a reality from which no one can save you, because no one cares. Weeks went by, weeks of unanswered phone calls, of visits to offices where she was told that her case is being processed. She was running out of money. She lived in a small hotel room that smelled of damp. She ate once a day. Despair was a constant companion, a shadow that followed her everywhere. She tried the Human Rights Commission. They listened to her kindly, with compassion. They offered her coffee. They told her her story was terrible and worrying. They promised to send a recommendation to the prosecutor's office. More paperwork, more bureaucracy. More time wasted while her nieces remained trapped in hell. One night, in her hotel room, Carmen broke down. She looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman who was emaciated, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and the look of a hunted animal. She was losing. The system was devouring her. It was turning her into just another file. A file number. That's when she had an idea. A last, desperate idea. If the system wouldn't listen to her, maybe the world would. She remembered a journalist she had met years ago, a man who worked for a small digital newspaper, an independent media outlet known for publishing stories that no one else dared to touch. She looked up his number. She dialed. Her hand was shaking. The journalist answered. Carmen told him everything, without pausing, without embellishment, pure, unadulterated horror. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, Carmen thought he had hung up on her. But then the journalist spoke. His voice was grave, serious. Where are you now? I'm on my way. The story was published 2 days later, with a headline that shook the entire state. The Eden of Horror. The father who raised his daughters as wives in the jungle of Quintana. The article went viral. It spread like wildfire on social media. What government offices had ignored for weeks, public pressure resolved in hours. Suddenly, Carmen's phone started ringing. It was the prosecutor's office, the state police, human rights. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone was deeply disturbed. Everyone promised immediate action. The bureaucratic monster, which had been dormant, suddenly awoke, not out of a sense of justice, but out of fear of scandal. The next day, a convoy of patrol cars and vehicles from the prosecutor's office entered the jungle. With them were psychologists, doctors, journalists, and Carmen. They arrived at the cabin. They found it just as Carmen had described it. An oasis of madness in the middle of nowhere. Domingo greeted them calmly. With the arrogance of a prophet who sees his predictions come true. The corrupt world has come to destroy my paradise, he said. He offered no resistance. He seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. The rescue was a chaotic and heartbreaking scene. Ophelia was in a corner, catatonic, rocking back and forth. She didn't recognize Carmen. The girls, Luna, Sol, and Estrella, reacted with panic and aggression. They screamed. They cried. They called Domingo my lord. They said that the rescuers were demons who had come to take them to hell. They had to be sedated to get them out of there. Seeing them like that, fighting to stay in their own prison, was the most painful thing for Carmen. Victory felt like defeat. The system, which had failed to protect them, was now taking credit for the rescue. Television cameras filmed everything. Officials gave interviews, talking about a successful operation and the government's commitment to the victims. No one talked about why it had taken so long. No one mentioned the weeks of indifference, the closed doors, the useless forms. The story does not end there. Because in real life, happy endings are rare. Domingo Vázquez was sentenced to more than 100 years in prison. He never showed remorse. At his trial, he declared himself a martyr, a man persecuted for his beliefs. Ophelia was admitted to a psychiatric institution. She never regained her speech. She lives in her own world of silence, a silence that is perhaps their only defense against memory. The girls were taken to a specialized shelter. Their recovery is a long road, painful, full of ups and downs. They have to relearn the world. They have to relearn what it means to be a daughter, a sister, a person. Sometimes therapists find them drawing. They don't draw houses, flowers, or smiling suns. They draw a cabin in the middle of a sea of green trees, a memory of their only known home, a prison that, for some of them, will always be paradise lost. And Mateo, the son who escaped, the bad seed, appeared when the news became public. He is a young man, covered in visible and invisible scars. His testimony was key in convicting his father. But the guilt of having escaped, of having left his sisters behind, haunts him every day. The system failed. It failed when it ignored the first signs of Domingo's madness. It failed when it didn't look for a family that had vanished. It failed when Carmen asked for help and was offered a form. And it only acted when the scandal became too big to ignore. This story is not just about a monster. It's about the many small, anonymous monsters who allowed it to happen. The bored cop, the indifferent civil servant, the society that prefers not to look. True horror doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in the corridors of power. It hides in the fine print of regulations. And it thrives on our silence. I'm Mateo Del Valle, and I'll see you in the next Forbidden Reality.